The night everything changed. The clock on Deputy Mark Ellison's dashboard flipped to 2:14 a.m., the exact moment every call from this place usually came in. The fog rolling over the empty two-lane road was so thick it looked alive, moving, folding, stretching across the cracked asphalt. And up ahead, sitting completely still in the middle of the road, was a woman, not walking, not waving for help, just standing there, feet together, hands by her sides, head tilted slightly, like she was listening to something he couldn't hear. Ellison hit the brakes so hard his patrol SUV shook. His headlights washed over her face, and that's when he realized something was very wrong. Her eyes didn't react to the light. She didn't squint. She didn't turn. She didn't move at all. He radioed in. "Dispatch. I might need backup on Route 17 outside Coldwater. Possible pedestrian in the roadway." A pause. Then dispatch replied with a sentence he'd heard too many times. "Deputy, do not approach." But Ellison had already opened the door. The cold air hit him first, sharper, heavier, like walking into a freezer. The woman stood exactly the same. Same posture. Same eerie stillness. Her clothes looked like they were from a different time. Long skirt, old-fashioned blouse. The kind you'd see in photographs from the 1920s. "Ma'am," Ellison said quietly. No answer. He took one more step, and the woman finally moved, just her head. Slowly, unnaturally, she turned it toward him, still keeping her body perfectly still. Then, in a soft voice that sounded like it was coming from right next to his ear, she whispered, "You shouldn't be here." Ellison froze. The fog behind the woman began to ripple, as if something big was pushing through it. The temperature dropped even lower. His radio crackled with static. The woman's eyes shifted past him, looking over his shoulder at the road behind him, almost like she was watching someone walk up to him that he couldn't see. "They're coming," she whispered. Before he could even react, her figure dissolved. Not ran, not faded. It dissolved into fog, like smoke disappearing into the air. Ellison stumbled backward, terrified, scrambling into his SUV. His engine roared as he sped away. But the fog didn't thin. In fact, it grew thicker. And when he looked in his rear-view mirror, there were silhouettes in the road, more than one, standing shoulder to shoulder, facing his car, watching him leave. That was the moment he realized the rumors were true. Coldwater, Arkansas, population just under 1,200, wasn't just a quiet, forgotten American town. It was the most haunted town in America that almost no one had ever heard of. And what happened next is the reason this story has never been fully told. Not until today. The town that shouldn't exist. Coldwater sits deep in the Ozark Mountains of Arkansas, the kind of place most Americans will never drive through, let alone think about. On a map, it barely looks like anything. A dot off Highway 65, surrounded by forests, so thick you can lose self-service within minutes. But the town's strange history goes back more than 100 years, and every decade adds more questions instead of answers. The first settlers arrived in 1883, led by a man named Silas Merriweather, a Civil War veteran who wanted to start fresh. They chose the spot because of the natural spring, cold, clear water running year-round. Silas said he had a dream about it, that the spring was chosen and would protect his people. Locals at the time thought that was odd, but back then, people believed in signs, visions, and destiny. So the settlement grew. But only 3 months after the town was founded, strange events started. The earliest recorded story came from a farmer named Elias Rowan, who reported seeing a woman in white walking the fields at night. Not unusual, until he realized the woman was walking in the same spot where his farmhand had been buried after a tragic accident only a week earlier. When he approached the figure, she vanished. Then there was a Rowan child incident in 1897, when young Henry Rowan, only 9 years old, claimed he heard someone cry in the old barn behind their house. When he went inside, no one was there. But the crying didn't stop. Neighbors heard it too. The crying lasted for 3 days, no explanation ever found. But the moment Coldwater truly became a place people whispered about came in 1914, when a fire destroyed the first schoolhouse. Every survivor reported the same thing. Right before the fire spread, they heard someone shouting inside the empty hallways. "Get out! Get out now!" The voice was described as that of a grown man, but no adult was inside the building. Authorities called it panic. Survivors called it a warning, one that saved every child's life. The town tried to rebuild over the years, but the strange events didn't stop. Lights flickering in houses that had no electricity. Footsteps on wooden floors when no one was home. Cold spots in rooms during the middle of summer. People claiming to hear their names whispered in empty streets. Still, residents stayed. People in small towns often stay because they have family, history, or nowhere else to go. And for decades, Coldwater was able to function like a normal American town. Until 1988, the year everything accelerated. It began with the disappearance of Anna Collins, a 17-year-old high school student who vanished while walking home from a football game. Search parties combed the woods, the riverbank, and abandoned barns. Nothing. But 4 days later, a local fisherman reported seeing a girl standing waist-deep in Coldwater Lake at dawn. When he shouted to her, she turned toward him and then disappeared beneath the surface without making a splash. Divers found nothing. No footprints on the shore. No disturbance in the mud. No trace at all. Residents became scared, but things only grew stranger. In the summer of 1994, a family moved into the old Meriwether farmhouse, the original homestead from the 1880s. Within 2 weeks, they fled, leaving all their belongings behind. When officials came to investigate, they found the table set for dinner, plates, cups, silverware, but covered in a thin layer of frost, even though it was 96 degrees outside. When asked why they left, the family refused to speak publicly. But a relative later told a reporter that the mother had woken up one night to see a man sitting at the end of her bed. She described him as pale, expressionless, and wearing clothes too old to be real. When she blinked, he was gone, but the imprint on the bedspread remained as if someone had just been sitting there. By the early 2000s, Coldwater had developed a reputation. People avoided driving through it. Local teens dared each other to visit the old spring at night. Paranormal investigators tried to get permission to film there, but most were turned away by the sheriff's office. The town had become a quiet secret. Dark, strange, unexplained, but still living, still breathing, still holding on to its people the way ivy clings to old stone. Which brings us to what happened with Deputy Mark Ellison. On October 12, 2019, the night he saw the woman in the road, Coldwater experienced the highest surge of unexplained activity ever recorded. Lights flickered across the entire town. Dogs barked nonstop. People reported hearing knocking on their doors, only for no one to be outside. A man driving home from his late shift claimed he saw someone standing by the railroad tracks waving at him. Someone he recognized from high school who had died 10 years earlier. And at exactly 2:14 a.m., the time that kept showing up in old Coldwater police logs, Deputy Ellison got the call that started everything, because his encounter on Route 17 was only the beginning. The next night, something much stranger happened, something that would drag the entire town into the biggest mystery Coldwater had faced in more than a century, something that would finally force deputies, residents, and even state officials to face the truth. Coldwater wasn't just haunted. Something in the town was waking up, and no one knew how to stop it. The night the town woke up, the day after Deputy Mark Ellison's encounter, Coldwater felt wrong. People couldn't explain it, but everyone felt it. Even the weather felt unnatural. A warm October day suddenly shifted into a cold, heavy stillness that made the entire town seem frozen in place. Leaves didn't blow. Birds didn't chirp. Not even the usual engine from logging trucks echoed through the streets. Coldwater had always been quiet, but this was different. It was a kind of silence that makes your skin tighten. Mark didn't sleep after what he saw. He went home, locked every door, triple-checked every window, and sat on his couch with the lights on. He didn't tell anyone, not even his brother, Sheriff Daniel Ellison, what he'd seen in the road. Not yet. He needed to think. He needed to decide whether people would believe him or not. By noon, he reported back to the station, exhausted but alert. Inside the sheriff's office, 2 deputies were whispering about the strange reports piling up since the previous night. House on Pine Street said their baby monitor picked up a voice last night, Deputy Harris said. A grown woman's voice. Whispering. In the baby's room? The other asked. No, in the living room. The living room was empty. Before the conversation could continue, Sheriff Ellison walked in holding a stack of papers thick enough to be a small book. Morning, he said, voice low. Or whatever you want to call it. Mark nodded. You've seen all this? The sheriff asked. Mark shook his head. The sheriff laid the stack on the table. Each page was a fresh report from the past 24 hours. People hearing footsteps, lights flickering, doors opening on their own, car alarms going off at the exact same second all over town, dogs whining at corners of rooms where nothing visible stood. It's like everyone had a nightmare at the same time, Sheriff Ellison muttered. Mark hesitated. There was a moment, one heartbeat, when he almost confessed what he'd seen on Route 17. But before he could speak, a sudden knocking hit the front door of the sheriff's station. 3 loud bangs that echoed through the whole building. Deputy Harris opened it. Standing outside was Mrs. Elaine Porter, a 72-year-old lifelong Coldwater resident. Her hair was messy, her coat was half-buttoned, and her face was pale. Sheriff, something's wrong with my house, she whispered. What's happening? The sheriff asked gently. It's my husband, she said. He keeps calling my name. The room softened. Sheriff Ellison lowered his voice. Elaine, your husband passed away in 2011. She nodded quickly. I know, but Sheriff, I heard him last night. Clear as you're hearing me now. He called me from the hallway. And when I turned on the light, she stopped, her eyes filled with tears. I saw his shadow under the door. The deputies exchanged looks. Mark felt the same cold from Route 17 crawl up his spine again. The sheriff wrote down the details, thanked her, and promised the patrol would check her home. But inside the station, it was clear no one knew how to process what she'd said. Coldwater had always had its stories. But this was different. Later that afternoon, Sheriff Ellison called a private meeting in his office. Only 3 people were invited. Mark Harris and the sheriff's longtime friend Dr. Emily Rowan, a historian and professor from the University of Arkansas who specialized in Ozark folklore. Her family line traced back to the first families of Coldwater, meaning she knew more about the town's strange history than anyone alive. Emily sat quietly, hands folded, eyes tense. The sheriff started. Emily, we need to understand what's happening. Is this just panic? Rumors? Group imagination? Emily exhaled slowly and shook her head. No, she said. This feels like something we've seen before, at least in the records. She reached into her bag and pulled out a heavy, leather-bound folder. This, she continued, is every documented Coldwater incident since 1883. Most people think the town exaggerates its stories, but the truth is, Coldwater has cycles. Cycles? Mark asked. She nodded. Strange events happen here in clusters. A few weeks of chaos. Then everything goes quiet for years, sometimes decades. The last big cycle was in 1988, the year Anna Collins disappeared. Before that, 1914, the year of the schoolhouse fire. She paused. And now, something started again. Mark swallowed. So this isn't random? No, Emily said. This always happens right before a major event. Major like what? Harris asked, trying to sound calm. Emily opened the folder and pulled out a map of Coldwater from the early 1900s. It always starts near the spring, she said. The room froze. Coldwater Spring, the center of the original settlement, had been fenced off for safety decades ago. People said the water level had become unstable. Others said people reported strange sounds there at night. But the real reason, the one locals whispered about, was simpler. No one wanted to go near it anymore. So you're saying everything happening is connected to spring? Sheriff Ellison asked. Emily nodded again. It always begins there, she said. Every major event in this town links back to the spring. People hear voices. People see figures. People feel cold spots. And then, without warning, the sightings spread outward to the town like ripples in water. She looked at Mark. Whatever you saw last night was a ripple. Mark's heart pounded. He hadn't told her anything, not a single detail. How did you? He started, but before he could finish, the lights in the office flickered. Everyone froze. Then they flickered again, and again, not random, not chaotic, but in a pattern. 3 short flashes, then 1 long. The sheriff stood up slowly. "That's Morse code," he whispered. "What does it mean?" Harris asked. Emily answered before anyone else could. "It means STOP." The lights went out completely. The entire station fell into darkness. 5 seconds passed, long, cold, tense seconds, before the emergency lights came on, bathing everything in a pale red glow. But as soon as the red lights flickered to life, every phone in the station, the desk phones, the personal phones, even the old wall-mounted unit, started ringing at the same exact time. All of them, all at once. The sheriff answered the closest one. Coldwater Sheriff's Office. He froze. A voice whispered through the phone speaker. Not loud, not angry, just chillingly calm. "Don't look for us." Then the line went dead. Every phone stopped. The red emergency lights went completely still, and the sheriff turned toward Mark, face pale, voice tight. "We're not in a normal cycle anymore." Emily nodded slowly. "No," she said. "This is something new." Mark didn't know how, but deep inside he already sensed it, because the woman he saw on Route 17 wasn't a warning. She was a message, and whatever was coming next, Coldwater had never seen anything like it. The spring that no one should visit. The hours after the phones went silent were some of the strangest in Coldwater's history. Sheriff Ellison ordered every deputy on duty to stay inside the station until they understood what was happening. But the tension in the room felt too heavy. Even the hum of the emergency lights seemed louder than normal, like the building itself was listening. Mark sat at the edge of the long conference table, staring at the silent phones. He couldn't shake the memory of the woman dissolving into the fog. He'd replayed it over and over in his head, trying to convince himself that he'd misunderstood what he saw. But the more he thought about it, the more certain he became. She was real, or at least she was there. Emily Rowan paced the room slowly, eyes fixed on the floor like she was reading invisible words beneath her feet. Finally, she stopped. "We need to go to the spring," she said quietly. The sheriff looked up sharply. "No, absolutely not. You know what happens out there at night." Emily turned to him with a seriousness Mark had never seen in her. "Daniel, the incidents we're seeing now are stronger than anything in the historical files. They're not random. They're not isolated. They're spreading, and if we don't understand why, this town will be overwhelmed. Every major cycle begins at the spring. That means the answers are there." The sheriff clenched his jaw. "And the danger," he muttered. Emily didn't deny it. Probably. The silence that followed felt like the air thickened. Mark finally spoke. "Then we go in during daylight. We don't take risks." Emily shook her head. "No. Whatever's happening doesn't care about daylight. The old records mention sightings at noon, footsteps at sunrise, voices in broad daylight. Light doesn't protect Coldwater the way it does in other haunted towns." "Other haunted towns?" Harris muttered under his breath. Emily continued. "If the spring is the center, then going at night or day doesn't matter. What matters is going before this spreads further." Mark felt his heartbeat steady into something else, not fear, but readiness. He didn't want to revisit the road where he'd seen the woman. He didn't want to step anywhere near the spring. But deep inside, he knew Coldwater was heading towards something dangerous. Some in the town had only whispered about for over a century. And maybe facing it was the only way to stop it. The sheriff finally spoke. "We go, but we go together. And we don't stay long." He pointed at the equipment closet. "Flashlights, radios, body cams." Mark nodded, grabbed a flashlight, and clipped a radio to his vest. As he tightened the strap, a cold feeling crawled across the back of his neck. The same feeling he'd had the night before, like something was standing behind him again. But when he turned, no one was there. The drive to Coldwater Spring took only 10 minutes, but it felt much longer. The The forest surrounding the town was dark and packed thick with pine and oak. Even though it was barely 4 p.m., the trees blocked out most of the late afternoon light, making the road ahead gray and shadowed. Emily sat in the back seat of the squad SUV, clutching her binder of historical reports like it was a shield. Silas Merriweather picked this location for a reason, she said suddenly. He wrote in his journal that the spring was a place where the world feels thin. Mark glanced at her through the mirror. Thin. Emily nodded. Some people in the 1800s believed certain places had weaker boundaries between our world and whatever else exists beyond it. Coldwater Spring was one of those places, according to Merriweather. He said he felt watched the first time he visited it. Harris, driving the SUV, exhaled sharply. This is not what they told me when I applied for this job. Emily didn't smile. No one tells the truth about Coldwater, she said softly. Not unless they have to. As the patrol vehicles approached the spring, the forest grew quiet. Too quiet. The wind stopped. The birds went silent. Even the tires rolling over gravel seemed muted. The fence around the spring came into view, tall, rusted, and wrapped in a line of old wooden boards marked "Keep Out," structure unsafe, a sign that had been there long, before any of the deputies were born. The sheriff stepped out first. "All right," he said quietly. "No wandering. We stay in a circle." The group moved toward a gap in the fence where the boards had fallen. The moment they crossed inside, Mark felt the air shift. The temperature dropped by at least 10 degrees, so fast he could see his breath when he exhaled. "Is anyone else feeling that?" Harris whispered. Everyone nodded. The spring itself sat in the very center of the clearing, a wide, round pool of water that should have been beautiful, but wasn't. The surface didn't ripple, didn't move. It was unnaturally still like glass. As they approached it, Emily opened her binder to a page marked with red ribbon. In the 1914 cycle, she said quietly, people reported hearing voices coming from the water. What kind of voices? Mark asked. Emily looked up. Her tone grew heavier. The kind that sounded like someone calling for help. Before anyone could respond, a small, sharp splash hit the surface of the water. Everyone froze. The spring was untouched by wind. There were no fish in it. Everyone knew that. No birds flew overhead. Nothing had fallen, but the water rippled again. A second splash. This one louder. Harris instinctively took a step back. What is doing that? The sheriff scanned perimeter. Flashlight raised. Everyone stay alert. The ripple spread, slow and wide, and then still completely, going back to a perfect mirror-like flatness. Emily stepped closer, voice trembling but controlled. This is exactly what the reports described. Mark swallowed. And what does it mean? Emily looked at him. That something beneath the surface is trying to reach the top. The sheriff shook his head. No, we're done. Back to the cars. We got what we needed. But before they could turn, the radios on every deputy crackled to life. Static at first. Then a voice came through. A woman's voice. The same soft, echoing tone Mark had heard the night before. You shouldn't be here. Mark's skin prickled. Sheriff Ellison grabbed his radio. Identify yourself. Who is this? Silence. Then, it's starting. Leave now. Emily grabbed Mark's arm. That voice. Mark nodded stiffly. I heard her last night. Before anyone could say another word, a loud, slow, creaking noise echoed through the forest. Everyone spun toward the sound. One of the old oak trees at the edge of the clearing was bending, not from wind, but as if something heavy was pressing against it from the other side. Then another tree groaned, and another. The sheriff raised his voice. Back to the vehicles. Now. Everyone began moving, fast but controlled, through the gap in the fence. But as Mark stepped out, he heard something that made him freeze. A whisper. Close. Right behind him. We're not the danger. They are. He spun around. Nothing there. Only the spring. Still. Silent. Watching. The group rushed back to vehicles. No one spoke until they were at least a mile down the road. Finally, Harris broke the silence. What was that at the spring? What bent those trees? That wasn't wind. That wasn't normal. Emily closed her binder. No, she whispered. It wasn't. The sheriff looked shaken but determined. We need to warn the town. Whatever's happening, it's already bigger than us. Emily nodded grimly. When the shadows left the woods, the squad vehicles rolled back into Coldwater, just as the sun slipped behind the tree line, painting the entire sky in a dull orange glow. But even with daylight still dying in the west, the town looked darker than it should have. The streetlights buzzed weakly, flickering like they were struggling to stay alive. Porch lights blinked in and out. Even the neon sign in front of the diner sputtered like it was choking on electricity. Sheriff Ellison parked in front of the station, but instead of getting out, he stayed still for a moment, staring through the windshield at the quiet town square. This place doesn't feel right, he whispered. He wasn't talking to anyone in particular, but everyone agreed. Emily opened her door slowly, stepping out with her binder held tightly against her chest. Mark followed her, scanning every corner of the street, the rooftops, the alleyways, the windows of the shops. Coldwater looked normal. Normal buildings, normal streets, normal houses. But there was something underneath the normal, something watching. They all felt it. Inside the station, the deputies gathered again, this time with their faces tight and tense. Someone had made a pot of coffee, but no one touched it. The sheriff stood at the front of the room. All right, he said. We need to keep this contained. No social media posts. No panic. No rumors. Deputy Harris raised a hand hesitantly. Sheriff, it might already be too late for that. The room turned toward him. What do you mean? The sheriff asked. Harris swallowed hard and took out his phone. My cousin in Little Rock sent me this. It's been circulating online since this morning. He pressed play. The video looked shaky and grainy, filmed on a phone. The caption read, Strange lights in the woods outside Coldwater last night. The footage showed the dark forest. Then, out of nowhere, several bright dots of light flickered between the trees, moving slowly, almost floating. The lights formed a line, then a curve, then a shape that looked almost like a face. The entire station went quiet. It already has 200,000 views, Harris whispered. Emily closed her eyes. This is how it always starts. When the cycles intensify, outsiders get curious. More attention means more people coming here. And more people means more chances for something to happen? Mark asked. Emily nodded. We need answers before the town becomes a magnet for thrill seekers. Just then, a loud thud hit the front door of the station. Everyone froze. Another thud, then another. Sheriff Ellison signaled silently to his deputies. They moved in formation toward the door, hands hovering near their flashlights and radios. Mark's heart raced. The thuds weren't frantic knocks. They were slow, heavy, like someone was leaning their weight against the door. The sheriff pulled the door open. Standing outside was Mr. Jacob Miller, one of the oldest residents of Coldwater, and he was shaking. His clothes were dusty. His hands were trembling. His eyes were wide. Sheriff, he said, breathless, you need to come with me. What's wrong, Jacob? It's my property, the old man gasped. The line of trees behind my barn. Something's happening there. You need to see it. Emily stepped forward. What did you see? Jacob didn't look at her. He just kept staring at the sheriff. They moved, he whispered. Moved. Mark asked, what moved? Jacob swallowed hard. The shadows. The room went still. They arrived at Jacob Miller's farm 10 minutes later. The barn stood at the edge of a long stretch of woods. The setting sun made the treetops glow gold, but everything below the branches was pitch black. Jacob led them behind the barn to a wooden fence. His voice cracked as he pointed. There. The sheriff raised his flashlight. Emily leaned forward. Mark felt cold air wash over him again, because the shadows weren't right. Normally, shadows lean away from the sun, but these shadows, long, thin, unmoving, stretched toward the barn, toward them. They weren't behaving like real shadows. Emily stepped closer, her voice barely audible. This doesn't match anything in the town records. Harris backed up. Are we sure those are shadows? Mark didn't answer, because he wasn't sure at all. Just then, one shadow twitched. Not in the wind, not because of movement. It twitched like a muscle. Everyone jumped back. What was that? Harris yelled. Emily shook her head slowly. They're not shadows, she whispered. They're outlines, imprints. Something is pressing against the side of the woods. Pressing? Mark asked. From the other side, Emily said. Before anyone could respond, the radios crackled again. Static at first. Then the same calm, eerie woman's voice that had spoken at the spring. Don't stay there. They see you. Sheriff Ellison raised his radio. Who is this? Identify yourself. They're coming through the trees. Leave now. The shadow nearest the barn began to change shape, rising taller, stretching wider. It almost looked like a person standing upright, though no person was actually there. Then 2 more shadows shifted. Then 4. Then all of them. Mark felt his stomach drop. Something invisible was stepping closer. The sheriff didn't hesitate. Everybody back to the trucks, he ordered. Move now. As the group backed away, the shadows elongated, dragging across the ground unnaturally, as if reaching for them. Jacob shouted, Sheriff, what is that? What's happening to my land? But no one had an answer. They reached the vehicles just as the last sliver of daylight disappeared, and when darkness fully settled over the trees, the shadows vanished instantly. Not faded, not drifted, vanished, like they were never there at all. Mark slammed the SUV door shut and turned to Emily. What did we just see? Emily's voice trembled. I don't know. That wasn't in any cycle. That wasn't in any record. This is new. Sheriff Ellison gripped the steering wheel. Then we need to assume the cycle is accelerating. Accelerating into what? Harris asked. Emily didn't answer, because none of them knew that the next event would hit the very heart of Coldwater, and it would happen before sunrise. When they returned to town, the streets were deserted. Most residents were inside, blinds closed, lights dim. The sheriff dispatched 2 patrol units to monitor the outskirts, but no one felt confident that patrols could stop whatever was creeping closer. Mark walked around the station to get air, but he only got a few steps before he saw someone standing near the flagpole. A woman, the same woman from Route 17, the same posture, the same old-fashioned clothes, the same stillness. Mark's breath caught in his throat, but this time she wasn't alone. Behind her, barely visible in the dim streetlights, were more figures standing perfectly still in the middle of the road, shadows that didn't belong to any living person. Mark blinked, and in that instant, the woman vanished again. The figures behind her dissolved into the night. Emily ran up behind him. What did you see? Mark stared at the empty road. They're not staying in the woods anymore, he said quietly. Emily nodded, face pale. No, she whispered. They're in the town now. And as a cold wind swept down the street, a wind that didn't match the still night sky, Mark knew the truth. Whatever had been sleeping in Coldwater for over a century was fully awake now, and they were only just beginning to show themselves. The night Coldwater couldn't sleep. By midnight, Coldwater felt like a town holding its breath. Every house on Main Street sat in an unnatural stillness. No porch swings rocking in the breeze. No dogs barking, no TVs glowing behind curtains. Even the insects, the crickets that normally fill the night, were silent. Emily, Mark, the sheriff, and the deputy stood inside the station staring at the map of the town taped across the wall. Emily had drawn a red circle around the spring, then a larger circle around Jacob Miller's property, then another around the historic town square. These rings, she said quietly, tapping the map, are expanding. Whatever is happening, it's spreading outward evenly. Mark frowned. You're saying it's growing like a wave? Emily nodded, or like something waking up in pieces. The sheriff rubbed his forehead. So how much time before the whole town is inside that circle? Emily didn't answer right away. She measured the map, checked the notes, looked at the distances. Finally, she whispered, by sunrise. The entire room fell silent. Harris exhaled deeply, running a hand through his hair. So we're just supposed to wait? he asked. Sit here and let it take over. Emily shook her head. No, we need to understand what it wants. Mark stared at her. You think this thing wants something? Emily opened her folder to a page from 1886, a journal entry by Silas Merriweather. Silas had written, "It speaks through whispers. It moves through shadows. It is not evil. It is not good. It simply does not understand us. But when it is hungry, it reaches." Hunger? Harris whispered. For what? Emily closed the folder. For attention. For contact. For recognition. Mark shook his head. This isn't attention. It's terror. Emily looked at him calmly. Human fear and supernatural intent aren't the same. We fear the unknown. The unknown doesn't fear us. Before anyone could respond, the radios crackled again. But this time, the voice wasn't whispering. It sounded panicked. Male, young, sheriff, emergency. This is Deputy Cooper. I'm on Route 17 near the Northern Trance. Static swallowed part of the transmission. Then, something is in the road. It's not moving. It's just standing there. I think it's... The radio cut into a distorted screech. Not human, not mechanical. Something in between. The sheriff grabbed his keys. Everyone in the vehicles. Move. Emily hesitated. That's the place you first saw her, she said to Mark. Mark nodded, jaw tightening. I know. The drive north took only minutes, but every second felt stretched. Their headlights struggled to pierce the thick fog creeping back into the streets. The closer they got to Route 17, the thicker it became, rolling like smoke across the asphalt. When they reached the scene, Deputy Cooper's patrol SUV sat in the middle of the road, engine running, driver's side door open, blue lights flashing silently through the fog. But Cooper wasn't inside. The sheriff parked and stepped out slowly. Everyone stay close. Mark scanned the road, his flashlight cutting through the fog. Almost immediately he saw shapes. Tall, thin, unmoving shapes. Figures. Standing side by side along the shoulder of the road. Dozens of them. Not people. Not silhouettes. Not illusions. Something else. Something that made the fog feel heavier around them. Emily's voice trembled. They're gathering. Harris whispered. What for? Emily didn't answer. Because just then, the figures stepped back into the fog, dissolving one by one like smoke and wind. And standing in their place was the woman, her old-fashioned clothes, her stillness, her eyes fixed on Mark. Mark's breath caught. The sheriff raised his voice. Identify yourself. The woman didn't move. She simply spoke, her voice echoing through the fog. You're running out of time. The town is changing. Before dawn, it will not be the same. Emily stepped forward, fear and curiosity mixed in her eyes. What is coming? She asked. What do you want with us? The woman slowly turned her head toward Emily, but she didn't answer. Instead, the fog behind her twisted, rising like a wave. A tall, dark shape formed inside it. Not a person, not a shadow, but something with the outline of both. Mark felt cold slam into his chest. Whatever stood there, it wasn't from the spring. It wasn't from the woods. It was older. The woman lifted her hand toward the shape, and in a voice that sounded almost mournful, she whispered. They didn't mean to return, but now they cannot leave. The dark shape moved just an inch, but enough to make the deputy step back. Then a gust of wind tore down the road. The fog churned. The woman dissolved again. The shape behind her melted away, and the road fell silent. Deputy Cooper was found a few yards away, unconscious but unharmed. When he woke up, he had no memory of what happened. Only a single sentence remained clear in his mind. Don't stay here after dawn. No one slept, not one person in the town, because everyone felt it. Something powerful was pushing into Coldwater. Something trapped between waking and dreaming. Something the town had ignored for generations, that now refused to be unseen. Mark looked at the sky, slowly brightening in the east. Dawn was coming, and whatever was coming with it was already here, where everything connects. Coldwater is a place most Americans have never heard of, a dot on a map hidden beneath layers of forest and history. But history doesn't fade just because people forget it. Sometimes it refuses to stay buried. What started with whispers in farmhouses, shadows in old barns, and voices in empty hallways has grown into something larger than the town itself. The spring, the woods, the shadows, the woman on Route 17, the figures forming in the fog, the warnings whispered through radios and telephones. Every piece is part of the same puzzle, a puzzle that began more than a century ago when Coldwater was founded, and one that is still unfolding tonight. Mark Ellison's first encounter was never an accident. Jacob Miller's shadows were never random. Silas Merriweather's journals were not superstition. Coldwater isn't cursed. It isn't blessed. It isn't haunted in the way most people imagine. Coldwater is awake. Every cycle through history, 1886, 1914, 1988, 2019, was a warning, a tremor, a message that something beneath the surface is shifting. Something that only shows itself when the town grows quiet enough, frightened enough, open enough to listen. And now, as dawn approaches, Coldwater is standing at the edge of something no one understands. Not the sheriff, not the deputies, not Emily Rowan with her generations of research, not even the woman in the fog who keeps appearing to Mark. Maybe this is history repeating itself. Maybe this is history finally breaking free. Or maybe Coldwater is becoming exactly what Silas Merriweather saw in his dream over a century ago, a place where the world is thin. Thin enough for something on the other side to reach through. Thin enough for the unseen to finally be seen. And the most unsettling part? This story doesn't end here. Coldwater's night isn't over. The dawn may not bring safety. And whatever stepped into the town tonight is not leaving. Not now. Not ever. Because Coldwater, the most haunted town in America you've never heard of, has finally decided to show itself. And this is only the beginning.